I'm so glad that you had that covered.
I know. I saw that it was
Because
like 5 seconds.
I
I was
was
like, wait a
so
second.
not ready for the extra part there. I was like, it's been a while. I'm sitting there like grooving out to the music. Yeah. So thank you, Cease, for
Catching all
playing a
that.
crucial role there where I had to scramble but didn't. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Axioms on Trial. Extremely excited to be here. This is impromptu, if you can't tell by me and my where all the magic happens. That no magic actually ends up happening. In my bed, brought to you by my bed and Cease's room with a painting to his left. We are Axioms on Trial, and we are going to just kind of have an impromptu discussion on, I guess, an argument. I've put together an argument, but I'm not really necessarily committed by this formalization of the argument. Though I do think, so I'm kind of agnostic on abstract objects in reference to propositions or um, maybe mathematical entities, things like that. I lean towards a nominalism, but I'm very open to the arguments. I don't think that the other side is saying something that shouldn't be at least recognized in the dialectic. And so I guess what we want to do today is kind of consider one potential argument that at least compels me or makes me kind of make the gears turn. And
Sure.
so I don't know, Cease, you're familiar with this argument. I don't know if you want to talk about anything on that or if you want to say anything
Well, just for the
prior
people
to that.
listening, maybe we should go over what is meant by nominalism and what is meant by abstract objects
Perfect.
in the literature, just so people have some
That's,
context of what
and
we're doing.
that's why you're here to help me fill out all that stuff.
Sure. Do you want to go ahead and then after that I'll read the argument. I'll go through the premises.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, if in this, I mean, in this case, if you want to talk about, I mean, like, I guess we could just do it in like referent to what we're talking about for it to make more sense. Um, so propositions will be the bearers of uh, truth or falsity. So it's going to bear a value of it being either true or false. And so um, you can talk about statements like, it is raining outside, for example, and whether or not that statement expresses a proposition, uh, or whether or not the proposition itself is a statement. And so there's going to be a type of distinction that I think a nominalist or a Platonist might make in this case, where the Platonist is going to want to say that the proposition isn't going to be like reduced. Maybe you want to say reduced, or maybe you could use kind of Quine's terminology of like ineliminable, right? You can't eliminate it from your concept. But in either way, the idea of a proposition, since it won't reduce to the states of affairs and won't reduce to maybe the mental activity or the physical things going on in your brain, that it reduces to some kind of further thing, which is
Well,
some type of abstract object.
well, let me
So,
jump in for a second because
yeah, go ahead.
maybe I can give a definition here.
If you want to,
Um,
yeah, if you want to, I was trying to just kind of deal with the conceptual analysis of how you would parse out, like, in this case, propositions, someone wanting to try to nominalize it by saying, like, well, they're just states of affairs, or
sure.
they're just, um, it's just your belief, or something like that. Like, it's something that you can actually talk about as being descriptions of an event as opposed to some real thing like numbers. But if you want to, yeah, if you want to give a
Yeah,
definition, that'd be great.
I'll give a couple definitions here that I've seen. One is abstract objects refer to entities that have no physical or spatial constraints because they have no direct representation in the physical world. They do not exist at a particular time or place, but as a type of thing. Examples of abstract concepts um, are emotions, metaphors, and abstract actions. Um, as far as abstract objects, it's usually viewed as objects of pure mathematics, like pure sets, for example, where like so the distinction between like a mental something of a mental reality. Of course, there's like I think a dualism in assumed there, which I refuse. But it's the idea that like while we have rocks, trees, animals as being concrete things in the world, then we have abstract objects, which are more like I don't know. Here it says we presuppose that we can use natural numbers to count concrete objects. I'm trying to see if there's a better definition here.
Well, so like and that's the thing is like you can look at there's if you go like Stanford Encyclopedia on the definitions in this case, like what all I want to kind of reference in the concept I have for at least for this topic is that you're going to talk like the idea is going to be that you have such a concept like mathematics. So someone like I guess would be like Quine and Putnam. I'm trying to go back in my own head. I probably we like I said impromptu, so I'm not really going off of like any notes, but you can have this idea that if you can't eliminate the concept or the I guess would be the predicate, if it ends up being like you have certain entities that are so like you have, let's say for like a scientific theory, you have some type of predicates or something that you're committed to in the scientific theory. You're going to be able to like if the scientific theory reduces these like dispositionally and they're just tendencies and you hold to some kind of view in that sense, you're going to be able to kind of reduce like what it is that it is that's actually being discussed. If you have some view with like mathematics and say you're committed to that in your theory, but you can't actually reduce those concepts or those predicates, then you're committed to them or you're committed to like those properties. So this is a kind of a poor job of Quine's indispensability argument, but the idea being that if you can't eliminate those from your concepts, and then they're going to establish some type of like real properties, right? Now that's just like assumes, and I think like people like Bill Grommy or Akil Bill Grommy take like this like notion of property existence that he does. So you could just object to that and say that it doesn't.
Guido is asking, is that similar to the Platonic forms or the abstract of the shapes?
No, well, I mean, I think if you're talking about like Platonism in terms of like, yeah, like this is like Platonism with like a lowercase p, I guess is kind of a way I've heard Alex Malpass put it.
One thing that might potentially clear this up a little bit is on Plato's Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. This is in reference to the expression of object. Frege famously distinguished two mutually exclusive ontological domains, functions and objects. According to his view, a function is an incomplete entity that maps arguments to values and is denoted by an incomplete expression, whereas an object is a complete entity and can be denoted by a singular term. So yeah, it's just kind of making this distinction between something concrete and this idea of something being more conceptual. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean the way that I've never been satisfied with. I mean, I mean, I don't say satisfied, but like Guido bringing it up. So like I'm admittedly not as familiar with the type of nominalism, Platonistic type of debate that people that are really interested in this will probably be adding more fruitful conversation. So I think me and Cease both admit to that. The way that I'm understanding, at least the view, at least the way that I'm cashing that out, is on um, a level where, yeah, these types of conceptual notions aren't going to be exhausted or cashed out or reduced to um, or dispensed or whatever. It's going to be that you can't actually eliminate them by reducing them to physical states of affairs or mental objects or whatever you have available to you. As maybe as a physicalist, if you're a nominalist, for example, say you're a physicalist or a naturalist, and you try to nominalize um, numbers or something like that. I mean, you're going to want to say that those are mental events, or they're gonna reduce to some type of um, mental activity which you think is physical, or they're gonna reduce to states of affairs. Maybe one just corresponds to there being one entity, and then two only makes sense if there's a reference to two entities or whatever. But you're going to try to nominalize the concept. And it seems to me that what the Platonist at least is trying to say, at least the concept that we're grasping, is that the Platonist wants to say that no, you can't really reduce those. They're in, I mean, I think the way Quine puts it is that they're ineliminable, right? Like you can't actually eliminate them from um, the language or the predicates that you're using. And so maybe going into the argument will kind of help express that, because I have a hard time expressing what I think knowledge is, and I have a hard time expressing on what I think naturalism is. But I think that given the kind of examples, or at least the thing we have in mind, might help elucidate better on that front. I don't think me and Cesar are necessarily prepared for a rigorous analysis on nominalism and Platonism at the moment. I'd have to get notes and stuff together. But I will say that this argument seems to talk about the idea of propositions, and maybe you don't, maybe it's not abstract objects or Platonism. It just seems that that's the candidate, at least this argument's gonna favor, as opposed to the ones that I don't know. Cease, do you want to just kind of dive into the argument? I think it'll make more sense when we.
Yeah, I do want to say to Muffin, that's exactly what I was thinking earlier. The Rasputin comment.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess maybe I should go over like the idea of. Well, I mean, should I put let's put the premises up, I guess, and we'll kind of go over it. This is like a rough formalization of the argument, so don't come at me, bro. This is just an idea to talk about. The only reason we're kind of doing this is that I am sympathetic to the view, or at least the idea that's expressed. This might not be the actual best way to put it. The conclusion is cut out, so I can put the conclusion on the screen. Yeah, I can put the conclusion here up on this screen here in a second, but we'll go through the premises, and while Cease is talking about or an objection or something like that, I'll try to put up the conclusion at the moment. I'm sorry that it was there. But yeah, so anyway, so let's just start with premise one, and then Cease, as we go through that, since you understand the argument, I'll get the conclusion up on the screen since I fumbled on that. So the idea on premise one is that if you have a proposition P, and so a proposition is going to be a bearer of truth or falsity. So you could think of somebody who has a belief, and they believe that 1 + 1 = 2. So we can say Mike believes that 1 + 1 = 2. And so what's that proposition is going to, the statement, right, that 1 + 1 = 2, or that it is raining outside, is going to express is a proposition that is true or false. And what's going to make that proposition true or false is whether or not 1 + 1 does equal true. In this case, it does. Or if in the case of it's raining outside, it's going to make that proposition true. And we're going to also have this thing like a propositional attitude. And the propositional attitude is going to be, in the way that everybody understands it, a belief, right? When I say I believe that it is raining outside, there's this thing called a that clause. And the that clause that I'm using is what's the content of my belief. So the content of my belief that Mike believes that 1 + 1 = 2, or Mike believes that it is raining outside, There's something at which is the content or the attitude of my belief. And that is that I believe it is raining. And what makes that true is, in fact, whether or not it's raining or whether or not 1 plus 1 equals 2. And so we have a nice, concise view. Statements express propositions. Propositions bear truth or falsity. Propositional attitudes are directed towards propositions. And the states of affairs, whether or not it's actually raining or whether or not it's 1 plus 1 equals 2, are going to be the truth makers that make that proposition true. And so we'll have a nice, concise view. So what this idea in the first premise is going to try to express is that if we have a proposition, say 1 plus 1 equals 2, if somebody's holding to the view that it's a mental state, right? If somebody holds to, like, assuming that they say, well, look, I'm going to nominalize, or I'm going to say that propositions just are my belief state, right? Propositions just are propositional attitudes. So when I say that 1 plus 1 equals 2, and that proposition is true, if someone's saying that they want to reduce that to mental events, or that it's just that their belief, then they're just saying that it's a propositional attitude. Propositions just are propositional attitudes. And so what we can say in the first premise is that if a proposition is reduced to a mental state M for an individual, then P equals M for I. So 1 plus 1 equals 2 just is cease believing that 1 plus 1 equals 2. Right? That's what that's going to mean. Cease, do you have any objection or any
Well, what I would
say on that?
my objection is that
I don't know about an objection. I mean, or anything you want to clarify. We can get. I guess maybe we can get to objections. I don't know how you want to take it, since we did.
well,
we go through the whole argument, or we can make objections as we go. I guess I don't know.
I would say that propositions are not just expressing a belief, but maybe let's go through everything first, and then I can address why I think that this view is mistaken about how language is used.
Sure. I can't put the inference rules at the end there, but I guess you guys could figure it out. So I'm going to add this banner at the bottom of the screen for the conclusion. So if anyone's seen you can see that I don't think any premise is being cut off the bottom there. Oh no. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just dumb. I just didn't realize that I was on this page, so I can just scroll down. Sorry about that. I'm just an idiot. I just didn't know what I was streaming it from, because I have like 5 screens open with the same argument. So, okay. Anyway, so yeah, so I mean, like, do you understand premise 1, or at least you understand that if you have a proposition, if someone's holding the view that propositions just are propositional attitudes or some mental event, then what they're saying is the proposition equals that mental state, right? That belief.
Yep.
And so then premise 2 is going to say that if that proposition equals that mental state for such an individual, then the statement I believe P, or I believe that proposition, just becomes that I believe that mental state, right? Because P equals M, right? So that's just going to be able to be substituted. Premise 3 is that if the statement I believe M becomes true, then the statement I believe M becomes true. And so here's kind of a way to express that that's going to make a little bit more sense. So, like, if you say a statement like, assuming this argument, or assuming this reduction of propositions to mental events, if you say some statement like 1 plus 1 equals 2, and they're saying that, well, that's just J Mike's belief that 1 plus 1 equals 2, then what you can just say in that statement is that, well, J Mike believes that 1 plus 1 equals 2, but 1 plus 1 equals 2 is just the propositional attitude, right? It's just the fact that I believe it. So the statement really just becomes, I believe, J Mike believes that J Mike believes that 1 plus 1 equals 2, because the content of my belief is itself my belief, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what this is going to end up doing is, at least what the argument's trying to suggest, is that it causes an infinite regression.
Now, why is it saying that it's a vicious regression as opposed to just a regression?
That's
Why is
probably bad wording on my part. I could say, like I said, this is
yeah?
don't hold. I'm just trying. This isn't even an argument that's unique to me by any means. It's an argument I've heard that's been brought up in debates. I've heard Jack and I think Danny and Josh and other people talk about this. I've talked to Joe Schmidt about this argument. I'm trying to think of the Rivlin on Discord. I can't remember. We've
I
talked
mean,
about that a
I guess
lot.
the
I
point I'm
can't
making
remember
is
who
that why
else,
would
but
this regression be viewed? I mean, I don't agree with that proposition reduced to
well, I guess the point is that I think
but
what's being expressed by the people that would accept that argument, or people that have heard that and objected, is it's just that there's an infinite regression, and the issue is that you're not going to get a fact of the matter about the content, right?
sure, you're just gonna get an expression of
Well, you're just going to get an infinite
attitude.
regression of like belief
Attitude.
states. You're not going to
Yeah,
have a fact of the matter about the content of which is actually being like,
talked about. Yeah,
uh, yeah, being affirmed to be true,
sure.
right? And so I'm going to full screen this because my eyes are terrible. That's much better. So if you have, so in premise 3, if I believe M becomes true, right, then the statement I believe M, which is what I was expressing, is that I believe, J Mike believes that J Mike believes 1 + 1 = 2. And so premise 4, if the statement
I think you're on
J
premise
Mike
5.
believes that J Mike believes also becomes true, then the statement J Mike believes that J Mike believes that J Mike believes that 1 + 1 = 2 also becomes true, and so on, creating you can say vicious regression or infinite regression. I mean, I just chose vicious regression. I just thought because you're not going to get a fact of the matter, right, about the
Mm-hmm.
content of what's being affirmed to be true. And so if that's true, I mean, you could treat premise 1 to 4 as and make this as like an argument just against propositions reducing to mental events, and somebody could use that being like, yeah, propositions just reduce to states of affairs, and they could use that presumably they could use that argument against that view. But premise 5 is where such a person would get off board, because now the argument's gonna tackle kind of the other horn, which is that propositions have an alternative reduction or way to, I guess, reduce them, which would be that propositions just are the states of affairs, or they just are the truth makers, right? So when you say that it is raining outside, the proposition just is the fact that it is raining outside. And so the fifth premise in this argument is going to say that, well, if propositions are reduced to states of affairs, then propositions are not about or directed towards states of affairs. And so the idea being that propositions have a type of like intentional context, or they have a type of a property of aboutness, or they're directed towards, right? So they have this the concept, at least, that we're working with, is that propositions refer to states of affairs, so they're directed towards whether or not it is in fact raining outside, right? That question's kind of open, and the states of affairs are going to make that true. So clearly the states of affairs can't be the proposition. So premise 6 is going to affirm that, right? It's going to say that, well, it's not the case that propositions are not about or directed towards the states of affairs, because in fact propositions are directed towards states of affairs, right? We're going to get into I also have objections to this kind of argument as well, but and then so you can move to premise 7. If propositions are reduced to the mind of God, then the same problem of a vicious regression would arise, which is that reducing them to the mental events of an agent such as God is going to have the exact same type of vicious regression that God believes, right? There's no content, so it'd be kind of like Malpass's argument. Essentially, it's just Malpass's argument against divine conceptualism, if I have that right. It's been a while, but so then premise 8, it's not the case that propositions reduce to the mind of God. So premise 9, propositions can either reduce to mental event states of affairs, the mind of God, or they are irreducible. And then the conclusion, therefore, because propositions cannot reduce to mental event states of affairs or the mind of God without creating a vicious regression, it follows that they're irreducible entities. I don't like the wording of a lot of this now that I'm looking back at this. I did this like a couple months ago. But I think the general idea is there. Yeah. So attack me on anything you want, but yeah, I would totally reword this or probably formulate it differently. But I think the general idea is there. I mean, the way that I kind of put it based on the discussions I've been in or listened to is kind of having 3 separate kind of arguments. Look, propositions don't reduce to mental events, they don't reduce to states of affairs, and they can't reduce to the mind of God. And so you have this issue, so they're irreducible entities, call them abstracta. And the favorability of that is that you don't have this issue about talking about entities at which you have to have some ontological account for, because if the argument succeeds, you're just rationally committed to such entities that can't be reduced.
So, Browley also, what distinguishes the abstract from a mental construct? Can the abstract exist absent minds? Doesn't appear to be the case. And then Guido also says, can P not equal N?
Yeah, and so Guido brings up a good point. I think so yeah, the question would be like, yeah, can you object and be like, well, look, P just doesn't equal that mental state. So that's off the top of my head, and so forgive me, people that are like really into this type of debate that understand this way better than myself or Cease. I'm kind of stabbing at the dark in the dark on this, but I think an objection could be raised, or you could have. So one objection could be, and then Cease, tell me what you think about this before I guess I get into the next objection, since I've been speaking for fucking ever. But one objection that you could raise on this is just to say, well, look, propositions do reduce to mental events. So P does equal M, but you're kind of making an error by saying that P equals a belief state or a propositional attitude.
Yeah, exactly.
It just refers to a different type of mental event.
That's what I was going to say. So,
right. So yeah, Cease, that kind of leads you into an objection that you could raise to.
So a number of things. I don't agree that a proposition is equal to the belief of the person expressing the proposition. And I don't agree that a proposition is equal to the state of affairs. That's not to say that therefore there is some abstract object ontologically separate from a physicalist worldview. Mm-hmm. Because here's the thing, if I say the sentence, the pen is red, right? I'm not referencing an actual pen here. I have no belief about the pen, right? The pen doesn't actually, I'm not talking about a pen that actually exists. It's on the state of affairs. But still, the sentence has a certain structure and a certain meaning. So what would I say I think a proposition is? And I haven't fully fleshed out exactly a way to express this very, very clearly. So hopefully people can follow what I'm saying. I think that propositions can also express a potential for things being a particular way, or if not just a potential, also a type of conceptual meaning that is derived from memories and understandings that we have prior to expressing the proposition that results from our experience of the world. So Briley says, how is a proposition anything other than one possible mentally constructed description of reality that may or may not actually reflect reality? I think it depends, right? Like an example of the pen I just said, like there is a red pen. I'm not actually referencing, I'm not observing a red pen. I don't have a belief about the red pen. Um, Certainly, I mean, I might say I have a belief that the red pen doesn't exist in front of me, but that's not the sentence I've expressed. I've said there is a red pen, but my belief is not what matters here, and the state of affairs isn't what matters. I think the proposition is encapsulating how our understanding works, right? Like what meaning can be derived linguistically about the way that the world is, could be, or just kind of linguistic coherence.
Well, so this is the thing that's going to be kind of raised, and this will kind of be relevant to Briley's point in the sense that if you're kind of saying that, so like if you just think about this in a modal sense, that like, and I just by possible worlds here, I just mean like a heuristical sense, not like I'm ontologically committed to like real possible worlds or something, but just talking about the way that the world could be, the set of the way that the world could be, so to speak. If you think about in all those possible worlds, there's going to be a truth concerning whether or not, like Donald Trump, for example, is the 45th president. Right? Then that proposition is going to be false in all the possible worlds where there isn't a truth maker like Donald Trump, who's the 45th president. And so that proposition is going to be, there's going to be a concern about that proposition, or there'll be some concern about the truth value. I'm not saying like to an agent, but there will be that proposition in all those possible worlds. That's something that someone might want to raise, just in the idea that look, these propositions exist in all possible worlds, or that if you have a proposition, for example, like if I say snow is white, and I don't speak German, what is it like? Sneeze. I don't know. I'm not even going to pretend like I know, but whatever it is in German, right? What's being expressed there is a proposition, and the statement expresses the same proposition, but that proposition is going to have a concern on whether or not it's true or false in any possible world. But that proposition can be relayed in any language or expressed in any language. It's just going to be expressed by a statement. And so somebody might want to just express that, look, it's compatible with the view that in any possible world this proposition exists, and it's the bearer of truth or falsity, but it's just false in all those possible worlds.
Bradley says, are hypotheticals actually propositions? I think reference to reality is required to distinguish propositions from imagination. I'm not, I mean, for a proposition to be a proposition, I think you have to make, it has to have some sort of truth value or falsity value. I mean, here it says, proposition is a statement or assertion that expresses a judgment or opinion. So maybe, I don't know, maybe my example earlier could be problematic as far as saying like the pen is red. Maybe, Briley I think is saying that if there isn't an actual pen you're referencing, then it's actually a proposition. He goes on to say, it isn't a matter of truth or falsehood. It's no could be yellow, but there's no is white. It's still referencing reality. It seems to me that how do I phrase this? Like I said, I agree that propositions don't reduce to just the attitude of the person expressing or the belief. And I agree that it doesn't reduce to just a state of affairs. Because when you express a proposition, you're talking about the state of affairs.
Well,
But sorry, what's that?
well, no, if you have a point, I was more so just wanting to see if I could ask Briley, I guess, directly and see if I'm understanding, because I'm wondering if this is the objection, but I can remember it if you want to continue.
Yeah, I was just going to, what I'm saying is that it doesn't follow from my perspective that therefore propositions exist in some, as some abstract objects ontologically separate from a physicalist perspective. Because I think in that conclusion, one is making an assumption about language, which I think is problematic. I can acknowledge that the description is not synonymous with the thing itself. Like there's always a distinction between the thing itself and its description, but it doesn't mean that that gap suggests some ontological duality, or like it can. Do you get what I'm saying? Like everything can still
I'm
be.
not sure. I'm not sure that I do. I'm not saying that you're not saying anything, but I'm not sure that I do. I mean, the thing that I might be understanding though about Briley's concern is that I think what they're trying to say, and let me know if I am getting this right. I think what they're trying to say is um, that like if there is not any referent, like you just kind of could have some. You don't even know if whether or not it's even propositional in the first place, whether or not it even is a proposition. So like, what's going to make a proposition even coherent is some type of referent in the first place, or something like that. Is that the type of view? I'm trying to understand if that's
He also wrote a comment, not an actual pen, just referencing the pen, a concept tied to reality. So prior experience of pens, or
okay.
the
Yeah, because
function
that
of
was
the
going to
pen.
be kind of my follow up, was just talking about like the concept of whether or not, like, well, I mean, if you have a concept of something, regardless of whether or not fits reality, I think people have that, right? Like,
Yeah,
think
and
about
that's what he's saying.
think
He's saying
about
it is enough to establish as a proposition if you just
yeah, but
have
I
the
mean,
concept.
I guess maybe I'm confused, because I mean, it's scientific inquiry. There's going to be things that we don't know whether or not exists, and that proposition can be true or false. And there might be some type of scientific inquiry, or somebody might think that ghosts exist or whatever, and there might be some type of inquiry that they have. I don't know if that's fruitful, but presumably there's, regardless of there being like an actual referent, um, there should be some type of conceptual referent, at least that's
Yeah,
uh, translucent.
yeah. No, I think he's in agreement with that. Yeah. I think the point I'm making is that language, from my perspective, is a tool to um, express what we understand about the way in which reality functions. And so that's, how would I phrase this? Like, I don't think that this means. So hold on a second. Let me backtrack for a second. Um, I agree that there is a difference between the description of something and the thing itself. So going back to, in the context of philosophy of mind, like Mary's room, right? There's no description of color that's going to give me the experience of color. That doesn't mean that the experience is now some immaterial, non-physical phenomena. I would say it's still a physical phenomenon, and that experience is the primary thing, and the language we use to describe it is limited, potentially ambiguous in certain ways, and secondary to the experience. Um, I don't think that using this tool of language means that language and propositions exist in some immaterial with some immaterial ontology. I think it's just an expression of our faculties. Does that make sense to you?
I mean, yeah. So I mean, well, this might tie into kind of the objection that I was gonna, so that we can move on to at least different objections of the argument. But I think, I mean, so let me, I guess, ask you. You want to say that, at least just from like the most loose sense, before I add on more, you're going to want to say that there's a more complex relationship between, assuming in this argument with the mental state thing, that there's going to be a more complex relationship between the mental events and the propositions, right? That what's being expressed in the argument, that it's not going to exalt, like saying P equals M for some mental event feels like it's doing too much or something like that.
Yeah, it's not going to be just about a belief, because like I said, we can have propositions that are not tied with an actual belief about a state of affairs. It's gonna be something else. It's gonna be an expression of, I think, certain linguistic rules, certain potentials, and I think that we can say that the language, no, let me say it backwards. We can say that the experience is not reducible to the language we use to describe the experience. The two are not synonymous. But that's not to say that the language itself exists in some abstract object, as some abstract object. That there is this ontology that we would call abstract objects that exists as its own reality, as separate from the material or the physical. I would say that language is what the tool we use as the expression of our understanding of the material world.
Sure. Guido asked me to highlight the past three comments. I'll do that, and then we'll move to P2 because I have an objection to P2 that I think might. I was glancing at your comments, Guido, while trying to also, listen and then do other things. I think the objection I might apply in P2 you might be sympathetic to, that I was talking to with Joe Schmidt of Majesty of Reason. Go check out Majesty of Reason. Though I tried to ask Joe earlier if I could get some clarification, but I did it last minute. So, but I'll go through that anyway. So the last three comments. Here we go. It can be a property of the attempt to communicate a concept from one agent to another, like rule following agent 1, P equals M, so proposition equals a mental event. But transmission of mental event through language could make an agent 2, P equals some alternate mental event. Property of Okay, so this might actually in the next objection I give, tell me if this applies to what you're saying, and I might just be way off basis, but this is why I thought that this would apply, and I'll give you that. So let me get the last. Oh, sorry. Make agent 2 proposition equals alternative mental event. Both agents 1 mental event, agents 2 alternative mental event will be true, yet. Okay, so maybe we should just get into, and I'll just read the third comment. Maybe we should just, that might segue perfectly into the actual kind of thing that I wanted to say. And if true, P can equal multiple mental events, and then it wouldn't be a functionality, at least mathematically. So, Guido, I think I understand what you're saying, and then just tell me if this kind of objection that that I could at least maybe potentially object would be the case. I think this would have to do though with premise 2. So if P equals M for I, then the statement I believe M become the I believe P becomes I believe M. Um, so I think that will apply to what you're saying. And so here's the idea. So P2 could be false because the sentences that are going to report belief states have intentional context. And so the intentional context is intentional with an S, not intentional with a T. The idea being that you can't substitute co-referring expressions without changing the truth value of the relevant sentence. So here's that kind of put in the easiest way to understand. So you could believe that you're standing next to Clark Kent, right? Even though that you don't believe that you're standing uh, um, next to Superman, right? Even if Clark Kent is identical to Superman, you can't substitute Clark Kent for Superman in the statement, assuming that the person believes, for example, that they're standing next to, X. Say that they believe that they're standing next to Clark Kent, but they don't know the identity of Clark Kent and Superman, right? You couldn't change the proposition that they're standing that they believe that without changing the truth value, because once you change the truth value, it's not true that they believe that they're standing next to Clark Kent, right? And so you might want to raise this type of objection that you can't substitute one for the other without changing the truth value, which might cause an issue for the second premise.
That,
and so I'm wondering, do you understand? So, see, first, let me ask you if you understand what's being expressed there.
no, I understand.
We're talking about this. That was his objection, and then I'm wondering, Guido, in the comments, if that's similar to the objection that you're raising.
Well, I understand the concern there, but I don't feel like the concern is ultimately addressing the larger problem, which is we still have a unreduced concept of a proposition. Like if it doesn't, like that may be true. There's an issue there with you can't switch those two concepts in that example you gave.
Sure.
But the problem remains the same. If it's not about belief states and it's not about the state of, and it's not synonymous with the state of affairs.
Well, we haven't gotten to state of affairs yet, assuming we haven't absolved the state of affairs thing yet.
Yeah.
Does this serve as an objection on the mental event thing? I think what you're saying we might both agree with, and this is why I had trouble agreeing with Joe, because it still seemed like the concept wasn't removed from the mental type of thing. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I don't think it necessarily resolves the view that it's still a belief, because yes, you may be unaware that Clark Kent is Superman, but the proposition is not involving
the a posteriori identity. Clark Kent is Superman. We will grant that identity, right?
It seems to me irrelevant, frankly, to the issue, because the point is
tell me why. Because
the proposition
might be as well.
The proposition here is simply referencing Clark Kent. So whatever else Clark Kent is, the only belief that's being expressed here is just referencing Clark Kent as Clark Kent, not every potential aspects of what Clark Kent, alter egos or whatever else Clark Kent could be. And so I don't think it's really addressing the problem.
So you would say that objection to premise 2 wouldn't actually raise any concerns for the.
No, I think it's not. I don't see the relevance.
So that's been my issue. Is I was wondering, and that's what I've been trying to ask Joe, is that I think Guido, maybe you could just bluntly say whether or not you think that is a good objection to it, or if that's what you're expressing.
I agree.
And Guido, maybe we could send. I don't know. I'd be happy to have Guido come on, and even just since we're doing it
Sure.
impromptu, if Guido wants a link and wants to just hop
Guido,
up.
I agree that it isn't
But
reducible to P equals M. Well, P equals M as mental state, meaning the belief.
so yeah, so let me ask you. See, so what you're saying is that like it's irrelevant to the inter substitution type of dilemma or issue here because um, it doesn't matter the co-referring expressions or being able to substitute them because we're just talking about the belief state that I am standing next to Clark Kent. We're not talking about anything about um, the Superman thing because
Yeah.
that's a completely different belief I have since I don't know that Clark Kent is
But I
Superman.
also think that it's a mistake to reduce it. Like I would say, it's still a mental event, but it's not synonymous with a belief because I can express a proposition for which I have no belief about. Right? Like just linguistically, me saying uh, a pen is red. I don't I don't believe in one way or another. Like they are red pens, right? But there's no pen here I'm looking at. What I have is the concept of pen, the concept of redness,
Yep.
all stemming from prior experiences of engaging in the world and having this concept established. But that is all established through my navigating the physical world and having an experience of the physical world, which I would say is itself just another physical phenomena. Um, and so, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but
No, you're good. No,
this
no.
would include. So,
I've been hogging it, so you're
if
good.
what I'm saying is right, then a proposition wouldn't be the state of affairs either, because we can have propositions about just potentials or theoreticals or things that may be fictional. But the reference, it is still, for it to be a proposition, to have any kind of linguistic meaning, it still has to reference, to be referencing something that we have prior concept of. And that's going to be grounded in something concrete, which is going to be our experience. And so, uh, what I think that leads to is that I think propositions are expressions of um, concepts gained through our experience. I don't know if you're following there, but
Well, I mean, I think so, but to me, it sounds like you have something that is ineliminable or something that is irreducible from the view. So that I'm wondering then how you
if
how you how you're reconciling the argument if I'm not misunderstanding you. Well, I guess you've jumped ahead to the state of affairs thing, which we're about to get to, but I guess let me see if um, I guess it seems unfair to ask you like, are you conceding that um, well, let me just see it this way, because maybe we could definitely make the argument better and just be more specific about the mental event thing and just saying, um, assuming that the person thinks they're a propositional attitude. Do you
so,
agree that the proposition itself isn't the propositional attitude?
yes, I concede that it's not a that the proposition is not going to be reduced to simply the attitude or the
Okay.
belief in the proposition, and I concede that the proposition is not going to be equal to the state of affairs. It's going to be about potentially the state of affairs or some other theoretical
Well, so here's
potential.
where I feel unfair to ask you because the argument's not asking you about your view, but it's not like the dialectical context. Um, So it'd be unfair to ask you, like, do you think they reduce to mental events or states of affairs in the first place? Um, but I am kind of curious where you lean if you're not, wanting to dive into that analysis. I completely get it.
No, 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 no. I'll dive.
We're already an hour in, and we're
I,
only at premise
no,
two.
no. I'll dive face
Uh,
first into the
but
analysis. What I've been trying to say is that um, I think the mistake people make when talking about philosophy of language and philosophy of mind is assuming that the gap between the language and the thing itself leads to some kind of ontological duality. And what I want to say is that no, the only ontology that there is, or that I think we have good reasons to believe in, is that everything is physical. But the language we're using is, and the concepts that we are expressing is just, how would I say this? So there's nothing about me, using a word or expressing a sound or the sound coming out of my mouth that I couldn't say isn't a physical phenomenon. Like, it's still going to be ontologically physical. My understanding of a concept.
Well, yeah. So, sorry. Assuming under mental events, like I'm not assuming some type of like property dualism or substance dualism. More so, just cashing out like mental events. Assuming it's the physicalist, I'm just making like a further distinction on like
but this is
just some type of like way of cashing out like your beliefs as which if you're a physicalist, you're gonna already assume as those mental events are physical.
But that's just the problem, right? Because the argument here is suggesting that there are these abstract objects, right?
Well, the object. Well, so I try to choose the language carefully in the argument, which is I don't think I put abstract. Yeah, so if you look at the conclusion, I just put that they're irreducible entities. Right? If they can't reduce to the categories available, that they are ineliminable, right? Or they're irreducible.
Okay. So using the word mental.
The idea was the idea of the kind of idea on the argument was it wasn't structured like deceitful way.
No, sure.
Because the argument wasn't necessary. The idea wasn't necessarily formulated by me.
But my expression of a concept.
The idea was that what compelled me on the argument was that you are just rationally committed if, in fact, they don't reduce to these two things.
But
plus God, then you're rationally committed, and so what you can evade are these concerns about Platon issues about abstract objects and what are these objects, because the argument gains a lot of force by, well, we don't have to concern ourselves with that so long as the argument can succeeds. They just are irreducible entities, and doesn't really matter what the ontological basis of them are, because we're just committed to some fourth category, right?
I would say that the mistake here is using mental events as synonymous with attitudes. I would say that it doesn't reduce to an attitude, but it does reduce to a mental event, which in my world is going to be synonymous with a physical one.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to clarify, is that by mental event in the argument, it doesn't.
Okay.
It's perfectly fine with a physicalist view as opposed to a.
So yeah, I would say that it does reduce. It does reduce to a mental event. In the context of expressing concepts that we've constructed based on prior experiences. Briley says this circles back. Let me put this up. To whether or not propositions can exist absent minds. Propositions are reducible to the existence of reality in the presence of at least one thinking agent.
Well, so that's the idea behind the argument, right? Is kind of taking this idea that if someone holds to this view that propositions can't exist absent minds, well, here's an argument, at least in the case that propositions reduce to minds or mental events.
Yeah.
We've covered some objections, so that's not to say that we haven't covered some objections that you could say, like, well, look, maybe they don't actually reduce to they might reduce to mental events, but they don't reduce to propositional attitudes. And so someone like yourself, Cease, who's objecting, could be like, well, look, I agree with you. They don't reduce to this, but that doesn't like exhaust mental states or something.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like
Mental
it's
states.
still going to be. I don't believe you can have a proposition without, you know, a thinking agent. A proposition is something that is expressed by a thinking agent.
Sure.
Um,
And so that's a potential objection. So we've given those objections. The potential other objection, like premise two, was the kind of like intentional context of changing the truth value when you substitute that. But I think me and Cease are both skeptical on that objection,
yeah.
um, even though Cease denies this argument completely, and I'm pretty agnostic. Like, so I'm a nominalist pretty much through and through. The only thing that I am skeptical on is like maybe sets, numbers, propositions, but really just propositions are the only thing that have ever tripped me up. Um,
Well, what I'm
but
denying, and I
I'm
know you
also
said
pretty
that.
agnostic on the view.
I
So
mean, I know that you said that when you're using the word mental events, you're not necessarily addressing any kind of view of ontology, whether physicalist, dualistic, or otherwise. But I have heard people use similar arguments as a potential defeater for physicalism, and that is what I don't buy.
what do you mean, like the irreducibility type of?
Yes,
Yeah, that I mean, we can get into a lot of that. I mean that in the future as well. I mean that might be one complaint,
well,
but
that is precisely what I'm rejecting is that this irreducibility is not a problem ontologically for physicalism. It's a problem uh, potentially for
like reductive forms or
reductive forms, but I think more so
because I mean, like presumably
epistemical
you could
forms.
just be like, well, I'd take a non-reductive form, so like I don't know why the irreducibility factor is really gonna trouble me in those cases, and then presumably what you're wanting to say is that why couldn't someone make a similar type of chess move here? Am I getting you right?
Yeah, no, you are. I think there, to some degree, the argument seems to already want to, and maybe not your formulation of it, but once I've heard in the past, it seems to already want to assume that the gap between the thing itself and the language already implies something about ontology that I don't think it does.
Yeah. So, and that's actually a good point. But we've hit about an hour and five, so we'll try to speed up and move on. But these actually have been really important points. So I don't actually feel too troubled that we spent a massive amount of time on it. But so I could just ask you this way: like you're someone that's, and it's funny because hopefully I'm okay to say this. I think that you wouldn't be mad if I say this, but um, your dad studied under Quine,
Yes.
and so you're somebody who would be like, well, Quine's type of property existence, or if you this the thing that I fumbled on at the beginning about the indispensability type of arguments that look, if we're committed to mathematical entities and our best theoretical or our best theories, and we can't reduce those, then we're ontologically committed to such entities. You're just going to deny that. Like you think
Yeah.
that that argument's just it's just I want to say ridiculous, but you're not compelled by that
No,
argument.
no, I don't think it's ridiculous, but I think it's making an error. Um, Again, going back to philosophy of mind, right? Like, I'm sure you've read, what's it like to be a bat?
Yeah, Nagel's paper. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with 90% of the paper. Like, I agree that there's nothing about learning the mechanics of a bat that's going to give me the subjective experience of a bat. Sure, of course, that's not a defeater for physicalism whatsoever. Because all we will be able to say there is there's a subjective and linguistic limitation.
that's right. You seem to embrace it almost. You almost
Yeah,
seem to wear that paper as a badge in a way.
yeah. But what's frustrating for me because I ran into so many people that take that paper, which I think was meant to be a defeater. Same thing with Mary's room. Like these were thought experiments that many people thought were defeaters for physicalism, but I think they're only defeaters for certain kinds of physicalism, not physicalism as a whole, but certain, I think, naive versions of physicalism that made the mistake of, saying that the description was synonymous with the experience, which that is ludicrous. But there's nothing about
Well,
any of
because
that.
because you want to make the distinction on those predicates being like reducible to the entities, and that someone that makes a foul of that is almost kind of prompted up an issue for physicalists
It's
that
conflating physicalism as just being that kind of description,
where
whereas
you already concede some type of gap there in the first
yes,
place.
I do, but that gap is not a problem for physicalism ontologically, because I'm not defining physicalism as just a description.
Sure.
Like it's I
I
think a
think that actually
strawmanning.
ties a lot of knots for me, at least on the view that you have. It may and I again I take a lot of agnostic routes because I'm just the more I read a lot more, I'm like trying to I seem to lean back to where I was at the beginning of the show, which is nice, but which makes me feel more justified than just having the intuitions and running with them. But I have kind of, if you watch the beginning of the show, moved into a type of property dualism, moved into a type of sympathetic to Platonism about propositions, hence the argument and the considerations I have. But it helps me a lot hearing what you're saying about the type of gaps that you have there, because if you kind of deny that indispensability notion and you deny these types of gaps with descriptions and thinking that there's just this like obvious categorical gap. I mean, obviously, you probably have a lot more you want to flesh out on the view, but it helps me a lot to understand
I think
that.
I agree with Wittgenstein when he says that the most problems in philosophy reduce to confusion about language. I think I agree with that sentiment. I want to. Brownlee says in a reality without mind, some pens would be read. The proposition the pen is red could never exist. Absent a mind, we wouldn't even have a
Just think of
basis.
liar, liar when people use like the pen is red or the pen is blue.
And also, I'm not a bat. Why would there be an expectation of
God.
physicalism that I'd be able to glean the experience of a bat from a linguistic description? There shouldn't be. I agree. Like that expectation doesn't make any sense. And but again, this is the mistake that people, I think, in the literature have made, which is to say, to conflate physicalism with some linguistic description, which I think is ridiculous. I don't understand why.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I'm hesitant to go into this, but like you could go into the type of like the thing we've talked about in the past, like the sense reference kind of Fregean thing and the Morian thing of like kind of the analytic synthetic notion of that we exhaust certain concepts of like H2O is water, but we don't exhaust them with value properties and those things. And so, well, if we can't eliminate the value properties, then they must be like their own thing. And then that's where you get like the Bilgrami view. You seem to just not be compelled, and myself is not becoming. I'm not as compelled by those views, but you seem to not be compelled by those because they take such stock into taking the predicates that we use and relaying them as if they are like one-to-one, almost tracking the kind of phenomena.
Well, yeah,
I
which
think
is
that the people that want to object is wanting to avoid the semantic issue and wanting to talk about the conceptual kind of notion that might not depend on language in the first place. So the type of objection that they're going to want to raise, I think, is that well, there can't be a language issue in this case if we're just trying to use language to relay the concepts, and those concepts actually exist. So like normative concepts or Platonistic concepts, right? The abstract objects that if you can't use the language to describe these concepts, nonetheless, we have some concept there, a referent, that might pose some reason for you to accept it ontologically or something. I'm trying to this isn't my view, obviously. I'm trying to kind of get into the.
because I would say that
I could be
concepts.
doing a bad job. Anyone that
No,
holds these views, I
no, you're fine.
apologize if I'm doing a bad job at
You're
providing.
fine. No, I would say that a concept is just the result of having certain experiences and the memory of those experiences. Now, or potentially the kind of putting different ideas of things we've experienced as a collage. Like, yeah, I've never had the experience of a unicorn, right? Like it's a fictional idea, but I have had an experience of horses and of and know what horns would look like, right?
Sure.
And so you could you put that together in some as a new concept.
So presumably you deny like Jerry Fodor's view that we have like I think Chomsky holds this view as well. I could be wrong. It's been a long time since I looked at that we have like some mentalese or some language or mental language or something like that. Like, um,
I think
I might be getting way off track on that, so that might not be a relevant thing.
no,
But
I think there's
do
some
you know what I'm
aspect of
saying though? You're
yeah,
familiar with that type of.
yeah,
I
yeah.
know you're familiar with Chomsky. Maybe you're more familiar with his view than me, but
I think there is some sense in which there is an internal like there's certain universal rules to language, but to what degree? What is the how would I say this?
I might have steered us in a weird direction because
Yeah,
I'm not prepared on this either. So if we
no,
want to
I
save
do think
that,
there's a universal grammar, but I don't know. I don't think that I'm in disagreement with that. What I wonder is what the connection is between our consciousness and the way
thank
the
you,
world
Guido. I appreciate
operates.
it. Now I don't feel dumb. I was stabbing in the dark there, so,
No, you're fine.
so I don't feel dumb now.
But yeah, I don't know.
It's kind of how I feel like when I'm with Guido or Forrest on Atheist Experience, Forrest Falkai, who is awesome and does a great channel that you should guys go check out. Um, when they talk about evolution and stuff, I'm always like, I thought I knew a lot, or not a
Mhm.
lot, but I thought I had a competent level. But then I started hanging out with them, and I was like, all right, I have to brush up um, on a lot of this stuff. So, but
Um,
yeah, thank you, Guido, because you
yeah,
come in
we'll definitely
making me feel like I didn't stab in the dark completely. So I appreciate that.
we'll definitely have more parts to
Yeah,
this.
we'll put that on the board. I mean, the philosophy of language is something that really fascinates me, and I just
Same here.
assume that that's kind of like a Fodor's. I was curious if whether or not you resonate with like the Fodor's view or Chomsky. I think you said since we brought your dad up, and being
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the idea of a
I thought
universal
he liked
grammar.
Chomsky a lot, right? Or I thought he was really into
Oh,
Chomsky.
he was, yeah. I have a love-hate relationship with Chomsky personally. I think
Sure,
there are
yeah, that's
certain.
right. I remember that. That's right. You
Um,
told me that.
I don't have
Oh, go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
don't have a problem with the idea of a universal grammar. What I'm curious about is how this emerges, right? Like, um, I'm not. I don't know. I think this is a conversation for another time, but
Yeah, yeah. It's
I'm
all.
curious to sort of expand on um, to what degree is language um, learned how do I say this? As we have an experience of the world, um, are there aspects of language that are just
Well, you can't use
innate?
language to reduce the concept you have. Therefore, it's
Right.
ontological. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's just it's hard. It's I'm struggling with how I want to express this. Um,
That's also, by the way, one concern I have is um, and this might not be relevant, but cognitive kind of placing this notion and not realizing cognitive limitations just based on right where we are in some type of evolutionary uh, uh, timeline, and assuming um, this type of notion of indispensability or these types of relation to concepts as if this isn't an epistemic concern as opposed to
this
like
might
a
sound really
metaphysical,
weird.
right? Like it seems to me to clearly not be a metaphysical concern. It's an epistemic concern because it concerns our cognitive limitations,
Yeah.
and that's only going to be available given some causal history, and uh, that's going to involve an evolutionary process from my view and your view. But
This might sound really weird, but I kind of think that um, reality constrains us in certain ways to where um, we're only going to be able to look at the world for example, like Guido is saying, like he says, language arrives from the concept of logic being shared. And I'm saying that minds don't exist in a vacuum outside of the reality within which they operate in, right? So there is something about the way that reality is that inherently shapes our understanding of that reality.
Sure.
And so how the way in which language fits into the process is unclear to me. If maybe sort of what we derive linguistically is parallel to the phenomenological experiences that we're going through when engaging the world. I think it's unclear. I think it's ambiguous.
Sure. Well, let's move on. We've spent about an hour and 20 on this. I don't regret any of that. We might have gotten in different territories, but I think they're, again, impromptu. So we're just trying to run through some ideas here. But I really do appreciate this a lot, having Briley, Guido, and you in this discussion. I include them on this panel virtually. Sure. So thanks, and shout out to you guys and anyone following this in the future. Maybe we'll do an update on this. Actually, in fact, we will do a part 2 on this.
Yeah, for sure.
Please hold me to it, because I formulated this a while back. I could 100% put a better argument together that expresses the same idea, whether I hold to it or not, just to kind of go through this idea. Sure. But let's kind of get into premise. I guess we're into premise 4 at this point, or premise 3. So premise 3 is, if the statement I believe M becomes true, then the statement I believe M also becomes true. Let's just move to premise 4 as an objection, because that's one that I have. Which is going to be that the statement, if I believe M also becomes true, then the statement I believe also becomes true, and so on. And so somebody might be able to actually object to this, just in the sense that they might just be like they might just reject and be like, look, it's just the case that is a belief attribution, and it stops at some point, right? To say that it doesn't, presumably there is some type of objection that they could have, that at some point a belief does come as foundational, or it doesn't need some type of recursive belief attitude or something like that. Now, whether or not that's potentially question begging is one sense, because if you've affirmed premise 3, I believe, for the statement I believe M also becomes true, then the statement I believe M also becomes true. It does seem to affirm that, right? That seems to just follow. And so your only objection is to kind of be like, well, why should I care about some type of infinite regression, or that it does stop? And you're going to have to demonstrate, I guess, that, or 2, show that you don't have a problem with an infinite or vicious regression. And for me, I don't know that I could give. I think that would be a faulty move, because you need a content about the belief, right? Because the belief is referring to some content. And if you never get a fact of the matter about what the content is that you believe, then you're not actually having a belief, right, in some proposition to be true, because there is no point at which you're affirming that content. It just infinitely goes back. I don't know what objection you want to have on this. I guess just some of the kind of objection is just that that might be a non-starter for someone. They say, well, look, I mean, it does eventually end in some belief state, and then they could, I guess, give some reasons for that. But it's not a great objection, but it's just kind of a considerable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's not going to be the state of affairs. It doesn't make any sense to say that it would.
Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, I mean, I think you're way better off just kind of objecting towards the beginning, then, because it seems that you're just going to follow. You're going to follow into the infinite regression if you just affirm the first.
We just send it to the Axioms email, and I can try to read it on there. Because he said, can cease read the philosophy of language section at the top of my language and evolution paper. And I know he sent that to me before, but I'm having trouble finding it on the list of you. I should have saved the actual.
So actually, in fact, I watched the video today on the rule following stuff that I talked to you about earlier, Guido, and that Cease is familiar with. And it's a video I found
Oh
on
wait, there it is.
on the rule following type of Kripke Wittgenstein issues, but through an evolutionary lens. And the video has like probably like 43 views. Like nobody's watched this video. But it's fucking interesting. And the guy who's presenting it like isn't a naturalist, but he's giving a pretty good rundown. And like, here's kind of a way that you could look through rule following through this lens. I'll have to send it to you guys. I didn't get through it all the way, but it's awesome because I haven't seen that in the literature at all. At least I kind of just see people shitting on this idea. But anyway, let's just kind of move on to the states of affairs, because I think we've exhausted kind of at least just prima facie objections that we could have. I mean, we could spend time on it. I know you haven't seen the argument for too long, and I kind of stored it away. So, are you okay with that? Do you want to move on to the states?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. For hold your peace, or speak now, forever hold your peace. Premise 5. So if propositions are reduced to states of affairs, then propositions are not about or directed towards states of affairs. I guess I have some objections, but or an objection, but Cease, I mean, I don't know if you want to start or if you want me to start or how you want to go.
Well, actually, real quick, Bradley asked you a question. Why is there an infinite regression? If propositions are backstopped by reality and space-time isn't infinite, then how is a regression regarding propositions an infinite regression?
Yeah, so the idea is going to be, at least under this view, is that if you say, so like someone's like, yeah, propositions just are mental events, and we assume their view to be true. I mean, more specifically, if they're affirming that let me do it in a way that shows it more specifically without the kind of objections we raised, where maybe it's a different mental event and not a propositional attitude. Let's assume that they just think, look, a proposition just is my belief. So when I say it is raining outside and that proposition is true, if I'm asked to reduce that, and I have states of affairs, propositions, God's mind, or abstract objects, and I'm just going, hey, it's just my belief. Well, the reason why that's going to cause an infinite regression under this view is that you got to think about the that clause in this statement, right? When you say I believe that, that's what follows the that, what's subsequent to the that statement, or what's called the that clause, is the content of your belief, right? It's the thing that you're affirming to be true. And so if in fact what the content of your belief is, or what you're affirming to be true, is just your belief that you're affirming to be true, then all you get is now that Briley believes that it's raining outside, and I point out to Briley, I'm like, well, hey, didn't you say that your view was that? I'm not saying this is your view, but assuming it is. Didn't you say that your view is that propositions just are beliefs, right, or propositional attitudes? And you go, well, yeah. Oh, well, great. Then when you said Briley believes that it's raining outside, it is raining outside, which you think is true, just means Briley thinks it's raining outside or believes it's raining outside. And so the statement is just Briley believes that it's raining outside, because what's subsequent to the proposition, or to that clause, you've already told me that you think it's a propositional attitude. So the content of your belief is your belief, right? The content of your thought is itself a thought. And so that ends up having an infinite regression. Not saying that it's true, we're pointing out that you can't have an infinite regression, and so we should reject that analysis, right? We should reject the infinite regression, because there is no such infinite regression of belief states. So I would agree with you. There isn't going to be an infinite regression. That's one issue to raise to them. But two, the main thing is that if in fact you think that there is an infinite regression of belief states, there's no content at which you're affirming to be true, because it just goes back infinitely, right? You never actually affirm any content. There's always a further question that's raised after you affirm the prior, and so that's going to be the issue.
Yeah.
Assume,
So we
assume
don't want me to
that
read this thing.
someone holds that view, and that, by the way, that's assuming that the mental event that P equals M is P equals PA, right? Propositional attitude. That's the way that I'm taking the argument on mental event. But the way I formulated it, and still I raised this objection, could just be some other co-referring mental event. I still don't even know what that looks like. I don't even know if I can conceptually analyze that. What I know a mental event to be are desires, beliefs, intentions.
Sure.
And so it's a potential objection. I think it's prima facie plausible, but I also don't even conceptually know what that objection looks like, which is why I'm agnostic. It's just why I'm not thinking that these objections work, and I'm also not saying that the argument necessarily works.
Real quick, Guido wants me to read this paragraph from his paper. I'm going to read this real quick, and then we can finish with the premises there.
Yeah.
Philosophy of language is a complex concept derived from the duality of conception of an idea of an agent, and that agent signaling via any means of communication to a secondary agent in an attempt to convey the comprehension of a concept from the primary agent to the secondary agent. I believe it is specifically the use of language as a framework on which one lays their cognition. With language to relay personal experience and emotions to others, there's evidence that this has had beneficial effects on evolutionary fitness, especially of a highly social species with a large capacity for empathy and compassionate thought. We are the world's most evidentiary altruist, albeit not always, and our close primate cousins exhibit similar evidence of altruism, though less developed than humans. Language is a tool. As we evolve more specialized brains, we further improve the tool of language over time to further specialize in our cultural environment. I don't know what you make of that.
I don't have any disagreement with that, to be honest. I mean, I think I'd like to have Guido on and we talk about that, because I think one thing that's actually interesting about that that's not really talked in philosophy is the type of evolutionary, like, you don't see in the literature people talking about other primates or any evolutionary process or any of that. It's kind of just assumed from the thought that we have at the kind of evolutionary state that we're at, and I find that to be kind of problematic on the philosophical side, because if these concepts in fact are developed and we can trace them and reduce them from such an evolutionary standpoint, then we can see a gradual kind of change that corresponds to the physical events in that case. And there's going to be a pretty nice, tight, intimate relationship there.
So obviously, like, I agree with the idea that language is a tool for communication. I'm not convinced when Guido writes the use of language as a framework on which one lays their cognition. I kind of think it's sort of, to some degree, the other way around. It's depending on one's cognition, the degree to which language develops, right? And I don't necessarily see language in this So at the end here it says language is a tool that, and as we evolve more specialized brains, we further improve the tool of language over time. I'm not convinced of that either. I'm not convinced that there is this evolution to a better working language. I think the limitations of language are always going to be there as a matter of principle.
We definitely need to talk about that. I do want to try to move on because we're at about an hour and 30, and we need to get through these. These ones will be a little easier, though, I think. So we went through premise 5, right? If propositions are reduced to states of affairs, then they're not about or directed towards. So, right, this is this idea that propositions have like a intentional type of context that they're about, um, or have some type of directedness towards states of affairs. To me, that seems to be. I seem to agree with that, right? But
Mhm.
here's kind of an objection, I guess, is um, could you have propositions, um, or I mean, saying that, here's a better way to put it, saying that it's directed towards some states of affairs is just going to assume uh, that it can't be directed towards itself, for example, right? So, like, you could think about, for example, the thought that I'm having right now. And I can think about the thought that I'm having right now. So it seems that it's plausible that I could have a thought, but also think about such thought, right? Have this like kind of second order type of referential
Mhm.
notion. And so the analog there being that um, this assumes that this premise assumes the falsity that that propositions couldn't just be directed towards themselves, right? Which would
Right.
be states of affairs. And so I'm curious on, I guess, what you think about. I guess what I'm trying to say there is that it seems conceivable that you could have something self kind of referential. Uh,
Yeah, and I actually think that a lot of language probably is like that. I need to kind of process that a little bit more, but I definitely think that there's a distinction between the state of affairs and the propositions referring to it. That's for sure.
yeah, I think I'm less like gonna, if I'm gonna nominalize it in some way, I'm probably not. I think I'm gonna agree with the states of affairs stuff. Or is that where you're at?
I think so.
So you'd probably affirm proposition or proposition. You'd probably affirm premise five and premise. Well, it's just a modus tollens, I guess, right? So if propositions reduce to states of affairs,
Yeah,
then
yeah,
propositions are not about or directed towards states of affairs. It's not the case that propositions are not about or directed towards states of affairs. Conclusion, right? Propositions are reduced to the mind. Or, I'm sorry. Well, the conclusion will follow at the end, but um, then we move on to the propositions about the mind of God. And so this is where what I want to say in the argument is that if you reject things about the mind from an agent here, then any argument on the first kind of part about mental states, it's just going to apply to God, at least in
yeah,
this case, because
yeah,
all
exactly.
we're talking about are what I'm talking about by mental events are propositional attitudes. So if you want to object, it's going to be this, I guess, a similar type of objection that um, it's some other type of mental event that the agent has, whether God or yourself.
Sure.
The reason, though, why I find I'm compelled by it is the type of arguments against divine conceptualism that show that propositions in the mind of God have this type of infinite regression issue, that God's thought, the object of God's thought just itself is a thought, and you get this infinite regression.
Yeah,
And that kind of is what in a way inspires the kind of the view, I
sure.
guess. So, and then that'll follow there from the end, that if people agreed to that therefore propositions can't reduce blah 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 blah. So anyway, yeah. So any objections that you have there on any of those premises, we can go through. I kind of laid mine.
Hmm. Uh,
Like I said, I don't really have um, any notes.
no, you're good. Look, I obviously I think that um, propositions are not synonymous with the state of affairs. Um, I think that's fairly obvious. Um,
I'm sorry. Could I express it this way
hmm,
on the mental stuff? Because I just wanted to at least say it. I just remember this now. Um, you could say that like mental states. Um, you could have mental states and their psychological states, or maybe some phenomenal states or something, um, that you have when you think about propositions, but the mental states themselves are not identical to the proposition. So
right.
you could believe that um, uh, ceases mortal, right? And that corresponds to a mental state um, of believing that proposition. However, the belief state or mental state is not going to be identical to the proposition, but rather it's identical to the psychological state that the person has when they believe that proposition. I don't know what you think about that. So, like, you would just
I
like
think
the
that
relationship is more nuanced between kind of psychological states, mental states.
I think when we're expressing a proposition, there is some mental process taking place as far as awareness, as far as conceptualization, and then expression of that conceptualization, which I think all results in a proposition about something. But I don't think that, but I think that's independent of belief in the proposition, and I think it's independent of what the state of affairs actually is. Briley says propositions are not synonymous with a state of affairs, but they are reducible to a state of affairs, specifically the state of forming and considering a possibility regarding reality. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that seems to, Bradley, that seems to basically just put you on the horn that they're mental events. Propositions are just mental events, and if that's the case, then your kind of objections would just have to, like, you could be fine with the later premises about states of affairs, or maybe you have some objections, but if it's in fact going to reduce that, then I guess, the type of objections I guess you're going to have are what you've brought up or what we've brought up, but that would be kind of your, yeah. I mean, like, I'm not saying that to like be like, oh, you're committed to this and you have an infinite regression. I'm not trying to get there. It's more so being that if you want to object, I guess, to the argument, in this case, it would just be on that part of the argument. I guess it seems like I'm wondering if I'm correct on that, because and by mental states of just saying like the however you cash it out from whether you're a physicalist or whatever the mental events are.
Sure.
Oh, you say no. Well, so I'm confused because it's either going to be like the state of affairs that are independent of your mind, or the state of affairs, the stance dependent kind of state of affairs. Is how I'm guessing I'm saying it. It's a description of the mental state.
See, I would say that
I'm not really sure. I'm
the
trying to like.
description is the result of a mental state as well.
That's kind of where that's why I'm confused. I'm trying to like parse it out without. It's just the description seems to presuppose the mental state, because the description is going to express a proposition, or the statement is going to express a proposition.
Yeah,
So that's why like the statement, my name is Mike, is the same proposition when I say mera naam Mike hai in Hindi, right? It's the same proposition that's being expressed with different statements. Not as like a defeater for like nominalism or something, just the idea that those descriptions are going to depend on like mental activity, it seems like. But maybe I'm just misunderstanding. I'm exhausted on objections, but I do want to see what other kind of stuff you want to say before we wrap it up, since we're about.
Barley says just as a belief is a description of the mental state of conviction. Yeah, but I think what's being said here is that the descriptions that are, like you were saying earlier too, Bradley, these are mind dependent and the result of minds doing what minds do, right? So, yeah, maybe he's saying that the proposition is the expression of the mental state. Yeah, he said it is a description of the mental state. I'm not sure. I gotta think about that.
Yeah, because I would just say like I could have a mental state, and I express with a sentence like the cake is on the table or something, and that's a description of a proposition, and it's a statement. But the question is the statement is expressing a proposition, and so it's a question about whether or not that proposition um, is just the belief or the mental attitude. Because if we say it's a description, I don't know that it's answering anything, because I agree, like, propositions are statements.
So I think we
It's
should.
whether or not what's being expressed by that statement, what that reduces to.
So I agree with Bradley here. He said the concept of an apple is not an apple, but is reducible to prior experience of apples on reality. I agree with that. But yeah, I think maybe.
Yeah, I think I agree with that too. I guess I'm concerned about things that we have concepts of that we don't have prior experience of. Like, I have a concept of um, an entity with intentional states that created the external world, and there was no external world prior to that. So, like, ichtheists, or people that say that God's incoherent, uh, sure, I mean, I agree that most people's view are,
I
but the
don't.
general concept of something with agency that exists alone and then creates the external world is not a hard concept. To me, it's not opaque at all. It's extremely
No, but
translucent.
it's not true that it's not based in. It is still a collage of other experiences of knowing what it's like to be an agent with intentional states.
Oh, so is that what's being expressed? Is that the kind of fundamental pieces there that arrange that concept
Are all
are
still grounded in
just
experience.
kind of emerged from other concepts that
Yes.
have an actual physical referent? Is
Yes.
that the idea?
Yes. At least
Okay,
for
I'll
my.
have to think about that. Yeah, that's an amalgamation of prior experiences. Yeah, okay, Bradley, I think I see what you're saying. I'll have to think about that. I think that's an interesting take. Um, I don't have any complaints about that take. I just think I was misunderstanding. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that's actually, yeah, that's probably a potential objection to add to the pile. The more I think about it, maybe a better one. I don't know. I have to think about that a lot, but I actually really like that idea. Or at least it resonated with me the second I started to see what you're putting down. Um, yeah, I think that's good. I mean, sorry for everybody, like, fumbling at the beginning and stuff. We weren't really prepared, so especially like definitions of stuff, I was kind of thrown off guard on the definitions. Because, like, well, um, I don't know that I could give like a Stanford encyclopedia, but I'm pretty bad at describing anything. But yeah, hopefully people kind of understood what was being expressed here. Just kind of a general overview that if propositions are mental events, which are supposedly propositional attitudes, then they form an infinite regression. That's a no-no. Well, then they must be states of affairs. Well, they don't reduce to states of affairs because propositions have this property of aboutness, and so for similar reasons that they don't reduce to the mind of God, then therefore they're irreducible entities. We've provided objections to this type of view. Um, it was a view that, at least not in this, the language that was the rhetoric that I've heard in discussions and talked about for the last year or two with people on this has made me lean towards it. This was just my attempt to try to formalize the type of idea all together in one. So hopefully this kind of expresses something useful for somebody, or maybe not. I don't know. But Cease, anything you want to add to it?
No, I'm good. The only thing I want to say is that on Thursday, I'm going to be interviewing a former Christian that I met on TikTok actually a couple of years ago. They were Christian at the time.
David Gonzalez?
No.
What
No,
happened to David
he actually
Gonzalez?
just came back on TikTok like a week ago.
Dude, link me up with David, bro.
Yeah. No, this is
It
somebody
was
else.
like one of our first episodes.
I think it's the second episode. Yeah.
Second episode. He was our first episode uh Tart, and so yeah. So shout out
But
to David.
and then on, I believe, Friday, I'm interviewing another former Christian who's now, I think, Wiccan, something like that sort. And then the next Monday, we're gonna be debating evolution with the brothers that we had on a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago. Mike, I don't know if you're going to be able to be there. I know you say that you're not so keen on debating evolution, but I think sometimes.
Well, I mean, I want to. It's like I used. You mean you know me for a while. I used to get into those a lot more in the past. I just I found it was like so background information for people. I got started in the debates on flat Earth like years ago, and because it was kind of me coming out of conspiracy theories that I had. I didn't hold the flat Earth, but um, I kind of gravitated towards those views of the like fake moon landing and stuff like that, and then that kind of went into creationism. But the more I got into it, and the more I bumped shoulders with a lot of people, I consider Guido and Forrest and all these people in there, the less I've been confident on my ability to do that because I've neglected that for years and I focused on philosophy and other things. So, and like New Testament studies and all that type of stuff. So I have to get back into it. It's not enough hours in the day, but appreciate the comments, Guido. I hope that if this did anything, I hope it just serves as a way to like further advance, I guess, the discussion on this. If there's any way that this is even a problem, if it is, or if this bothers somebody, hopefully this just serves to kind of think about the concepts and figure out what we're actually talking about when we talk about propositions. So hopefully this does just something to spark I don't know, cognitive flair or something. But anyway, guys, I'm all set. Cease, please close out with the statements that you have, and I'll get the closing ready.
Okay, no, that's about it. Just want people to know what episodes are coming up soon. We may also be. I'm for some reason. I don't know if people here are not going to know, but there's someone named Nolan on TikTok and Discord who's been talking a lot of shit.
I'd love to have Nolan on here.
He's refusing to come on here, but he wants to debate me on Discord. So what I'm thinking of doing is debating on Discord, recording it, and posting it on here. We'll have to see.
I'll stream it for you.
But I think Nolan's brother had also talked about potentially coming on here.
Yeah, Brian's. I've heard things about him in terms of the child stuff.
Yeah, I heard it too.
If that shit's true, then that's fucked up. I don't know. I just heard things, so I don't go off of anecdotal testimonies, but they're from people I trust. So, aside from that, he's always been willing to discuss things, and this type of Platonistic view is something that I've argued for him as a view, as a potential view that could be true. Yeah, it'd be great to have them on because I have like 20 different objections to their views.
Oh, the topic with Nolan
the Platonism one just as like teasing out inconsistencies in their view. Like
the topic with Nolan is the presuppositionalist perspective, which I've said before is the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, they're both presuppositionalists.
Yeah. But
and no offense to them, but they're really bad at it.
Yeah.
Like worse than normal.
Yeah.
I got Nolan to give Nolan credit. He's actually finally sent me an argument. He said he had no presuppers really ever done that. Sent me an actual argument, but it was completely invalid, like 100% invalid. Me and the Amdir had to spend Christmas Day going over the argument on like private messages and formulating the argument for him to make it valid, which still didn't work. But anyway.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Peace out. Presuppositionalists, don't let your atheists do your arguments for you. It's not a good look. All right, peace out.